Hey guys, long time no see. I haven't made a video in a long time, so I just wanted to ease back into it by discussing some thoughts I have about the learning process. I get a lot of questions centered around how fast or how long you should be drawing per day. And I think this preoccupation with speed is really detrimental to learning. So what I want you to do is to stop, take a deep breath, and slow down. Art isn't a race. It isn't a competition for who's pulled the most all-nighters, or for who has drawn the most consecutive hours in a row. The truth is, we don't remember our favorite artists because they drew very fast. It's not like a tour guide at the Met goes to the guests, "Here's the Rembrandt section. He was the fastest painter in all of the Netherlands. And here's a speed paint by Sargent. Can you believe he did all of these in a half hour?" Well, actually he did it in 2 weeks, but the footage was compressed into a half hour, so it's pretty much the same thing. I think the notion of speed being tantamount in art comes from the current culture. Most of the art being generated is for the entertainment industry, which relies on extremely tight deadlines, and social media is also very rewarding of expedient uploads. While speed is necessary as a professional, it's not something that you should be focused on very early in your learning process. Instead, focus on having fun and just trying to make your artwork better. Speed will then come as a natural side effect the more comfortable you are with your process. Fortunately or unfortunately, the quickest way to get good at art is to be strategic about your approach, be patient, and don't be too hard on yourself. So in just a moment, I'll talk to you about how I break down the learning process into digestible steps and what I do to plan out my day. But first, I just want to tell you about today's sponsor, Wix. Wix is a website building platform that allows you to build highly customizable, creative, and professional websites. Wix also provides marketing tools that help you get traffic, close deals, and build customer loyalty. You can use the advanced drag and drop tools to create a beautiful website quickly and efficiently. Wix enables you to create a website for almost any purpose, be it a business, personal brand, or probably most relevant to you guys, a portfolio. They offer bookings, payments, blogs, forums, and hundreds of templates, as well as all-in-one management. Wix has some of the most advanced tools that allowed me to quickly upload my sketches, connect my YouTube and Instagram, as well as set up an online store, which is really great if you're trying to sell prints or sketchbooks. So head to wix.com/go/moderndayjames to create your own professional website. So I've divided the learning process into 4 loose phases that all kind of blur into one another, but I've named them the baby phase, fundamentals phase, imitation and implementation phase, and the experimentation phase. In this first phase of the learning process, this is the pinnacle of the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I don't mean that in a bad way, it's actually a blessing in disguise, because your lack of a critical eye will allow you to just experience your imagination and try to put pen to paper, kind of without any inhibitions. Most artists who've drawn all their life went through this phase pretty early on. Since children generally aren't hindered by the quality of the drawing, they just draw with incredible freedom. But for those of us who started drawing at an older age, it's pretty difficult to recreate this period since our brains are so hardwired at this point to distinguish art that looks good and art that looks bad. But recently I found that forcing myself and my rather unwilling students to scribble, doodle, make a mess has just helped reverse engineer this state to some extent. If you're wondering what the benefit of scribbling and making a mess could be, I find that limiting expectations and inhibitions when drawing makes me more energetic and childlike and feels like I'm creating a more direct connection between my brain and the paper. So especially those of you that are stuck in the second phase of this process, be sure to take time at the beginning of your day to doodle, make a mess, and be a kid again. The next phase is the fundamentals phase, which is where I think most of you watching are focusing most of your energy. Keep in mind what your goal is here. Don't be like me and get stuck in boxland for too long. Our goal here is to develop a tool set to do what we wanted to do in the first place, make art. Remember that the fundamentals, while necessary, are not the end goal. And just like a musician who only plays scales and never actually completes a song, it's important to know when to move on. That being said, Learning the fundamentals, and not just learning, but becoming more and more fluent in it, like speaking a language, allows you to communicate more efficiently and effectively. There's probably a variety of breakdowns of the fundamentals out there, but I would consider it perspective, anatomy, gesture and pose, line work and hatching, lighting and rendering, and composition. Each of these skill sets have direct exercises for study. Want to learn perspective? Well, draw boxes and buildings. Want to learn how to add light to your scene? First, practice shading primitive forms. It can be tough to figure out how much time to spend on each of these, so we'll talk about how to create a self-curriculum later, but remember that art is a lifelong endeavor, and there's always room for improvement in each of these facets. Try not to rush yourself too much. If you're struggling to design a character, take a step back and just try to get a handle on drawing the figure from reference first. This will save you a lot of time and energy and get you more comfortable drawing the figure so that you don't get stuck on that arm or leg that just can't get into the right place. We can all be a bit naive in thinking that just because we've looked at a reference or seen the thing we want to draw once, that we know exactly what marks we want to make on the paper. There's no one singular approach to drawing, so we need to study the works of masters. Which brings us to the third phase, the imitation and implementation phase. My students will often ask me, how do I draw a specific subject matter? And the only really way to answer that question is to look at others and interpret what they're doing. For example, Claire Wendling draws the figure mostly using outer contours and some subtle hatching, whereas Ian McCaig uses a fair bit of rendering but has a much looser approach to the line work. It's our job as novices to look at their lines and drawings and try to get into their mindset. Ask yourself what the purpose of each line is in the drawing and what steps were taken to get to the final product. You can ask yourself questions like, why do the hatching lines go in the direction that they do? Why are some lines thicker than others? What types of shapes are they using and why? Are they hyper-exaggerated or are they realistic? Each of these questions gets you closer to understanding how someone draws a particular subject. We can take this a step further. Now that you've created a sort of rule set for how an artist draws something, try to draw from reference but in their style. You'll probably find that a lot of the questions you were coming up with before will be answered just by the act of imitating. But before we get accused of being plagiarists, it's best we move on to the final stage, which is the experimentation phase. Here's where we can begin to play around. You can imagine doing a drawing using the line work of John Singer Sargent with the shapes of Joe Madureira. Maybe that drawing won't look good, but you could try it. Or what if we began totally abstractly by placing a bunch of random shapes on the canvas and try to use those techniques we developed earlier to make sense out of this mess. I've seen the artist Gary Villarreal make really awesome characters out of the most peculiar shapes possible, some from spit globules, clouds, clumps of hair on the side of the shower. Inspiration can come from the most peculiar of places, so try to just embrace the randomness and rely on those fundamentals that you've developed to bring some sense to it. So that's my breakdown of the learning process as a whole, but how do we know what to study? Well, art is like World of Warcraft or any other RPG, in that we have a limited amount of experience points to tech into specific skill sets. So what we need to try to establish is a clear goal. This could be a particular art job, a position, or even an artist's style that you look up to. If your ultimate goal is to be a landscape or environment artist, then maybe you shouldn't be spending all your time focused on anatomy and gesture, but instead prioritize composition, lighting, and shape design. And this isn't to say that you should cut yourself off from certain endeavors, especially early on, but if you have a clear focus, then I think that you should go for it. Another thing to be aware of is that there are many ways to make a living as an artist. There's a great video from Trent Kanuga where he talks about all the art jobs in a game studio. I'll leave the link down below. But just to add to that, a lot of artists make a living selling printed sketchbooks, doing illustrations for card and board games, as well as designing products. And social media can be a really helpful tool for building financial independence as an artist. You can pursue whatever type of art you want, and so long as you have a social media audience, you can support yourself with things like Patreon. But just beware that you don't fall into some of the pitfalls of social media and get caught up in that rat race and stop pursuing art for yourself. I find that a good way to organize my day is based on projects. So let's say our goal is to make a couple of character designs. We can start the day by first warming up doing some loose figures and sketches, then move on to doing studies, so we can study anatomy, designs of other artists that we look up to. But for the rest of the day, you want to try to take those skills that you've learned and apply it to your own designs. By applying the skills developed in those studies earlier in the day, you end up testing yourself, seeing what you retained and what you didn't, which will help inform your studies for the next day. So if your character's hands all ended up looking like crap, well then you know that the following day that you should take some time to study hands before jumping back into your character designs. And just because it gets asked a lot, there's really no set amount of time that you need to be spending on art each day. It's obviously going to take a lot of time and effort to reach your goal, but remember that's kind of why we're doing it in the first place. So just learn to embrace the journey, and remember it's a marathon and not a race. Anyway guys, thanks so much for listening to me ramble. I know it's been a while since I've last uploaded, so I really appreciate you sticking around. I'm planning on uploading a lot more frequently. I just needed a bit of a social media break. So take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.